Thank you guys for joining Do Not Flush. On today's episode, I think we're going to be talking about a very intriguing topic. Where does faith fit into in the office? We're joined in with Jeff Schiefelbein. He has, I believe, a unique background with various kind of insights and based on experience and third party folks kind of telling him that, giving him the feedback that I believe makes him an authority on the topic. So with that, Jeff, please give us introduce yourself and we'll
Michael, you're the first person to ever tell me that you want to invite me to something called Do Not Flush. So trust me that you got my attention pretty quick with how strange that is. But I love the angle of this. Excited to be with you today. Excited to talk really about all the things that I care about the most. So it's the faith and priorities of who I am as a human being and the things that matter to me the most in my humanity, followed by how do those get integrated into my leadership in my businesses and throughout all the different organizations I'm involved in? And then ultimately, how do I use all of what I just described to architect cultures that honor and love and promote and challenge the human person, regardless of their background, so that I'm not trying to get people to be like me? So little teaser there. But I will say this, that as a way of background, I am married to Amanda, my beautiful wife. We are about to celebrate 14 years this month, and we have 7 beautiful children, ages 11 all the way down to 1. I always like to rattle it off: 11, 9, 7, 5, 4, 2, and 1. And so obviously no duplicates in there. And that's my primary vocation. I'm a husband and a father. And obviously I want to provide and to take care for my family. But in the grand scheme of things, when people want to know what I do, I talk about those things: fatherhood, and I talk about being a great spouse, because you could switch out the business card, you could get promoted, you could get fired, you could start a company, you could close a company, and none of that changes the parts of who I am: son of God, husband to Amanda. From a business perspective, I would tell you that the normal, or maybe it's even in the show notes, kind of bio would talk about a lot of the national awards that I've received for great cultures, for startups, for innovation, for leadership, and even for marketing. And it really comes from going all the way back 25 years ago to my first nonprofit, which became the nation's largest program to reduce drunk driving in a college town, and also includes energy companies and energy brokerage firms and many other organizations in between, where I keep using the same playbook of how we grow businesses and how we invest in people. And it's not my playbook, but I'm just good at running it. So glad to be here with you.
Beautiful. Thank you again for joining. So I think the first kind of question is, when you kind of approach a company, or a company approaches you and says, hey, listen, we need to improve our culture. We understand it's vital to our day-to-day operations. We understand that it's something not only can attract talent, but it's genuinely has been proven at this point in time that, or at least I should say, it is believed at a large scale that it does play into the company's or organization's level of productivity and efficiency. So, and a lot of them, folks come and say it all depends on the right leadership. It depends on maybe the right mission. It depends on, having the pizza on Fridays for some folks, but I feel like when I came across your organization and the way you conduct things, I thought that was quite different and unique from what is currently being you see in the market. So my question to you is, how much of those attributes are really truly affect a culture within an organization in today's world, where everything would try to kind of be more secular, to kind of, the think is that this is more encompassing of the various backgrounds and faith backgrounds and culture and whatnot. And when do you inject a faith? And is this something that is always, is it like, you didn't give a disclaimer to an organization before you do so, or is this something that is like the final touch, kind of like a finishing salt on a dish? Can you give us some insights here?
Sure. I like that finishing salt. So let's start with this. People's understanding of culture is typically off. So we do have a surge or maybe even a buzzword around culture that people say it matters, it's been proven to matter, blah, blah, blah. But then when you actually get inside of most organizations, culture is the responsibility of one person, or it's something that HR is supposed to do. When people say we have a good culture, they do that referencing Pizza Fridays or whatever the case may be. They even talk about things like their generous paid time off policy, which those things are fine. And then when things are difficult, they say they don't have time to worry about culture. They focus on the bottom line. People that are involved in culture are not given a seat at the table because culture was just nice to have when things were nice, but we don't need to worry about culture right now. And all of that fundamentally misses what is culture. I took from a book called Powerful. I always like to pull books out of the bookshelf. This book, Powerful, it's about Netflix. I'm not even a Netflix fan, but I'm a fan of the culture architecture that they did. And they have a definition of culture that I think is a big shift for most people. They say that culture is the strategy of how we do work, not that culture eats strategy for breakfast, not that, somehow culture is this thing that you get to add on later. It's that every single thing we do in our strategy or lack thereof builds our culture. So I would argue that culture is, how do you write job descriptions, post for jobs, and do you speak to or not speak to each person who's coming in, submitting their resume? Do they even know if you got it? All the way through interviewing, hiring, onboarding, training, promoting, demoting, performance plans, celebrations, failures, the celebration of failures, the strategies, teamwork, protectionist vibes versus partnership vibes, all the way through to layoffs, resignations, terminations, and how are people spoken about after they're no longer with the organization, and how do they speak about you? So in that world, try to tell me one thing that isn't culture about our business. What systems we use to communicate, the norms of how we do or don't adhere to what we say we're going to do, the way that we build cross-functional teams or celebrate the agency that we're passing down to the lowest possible levels where decisions should be made because they're the people that are the most affected by it. Like, all of these things are the intentional or unintentional parts of culture, but everybody has one. You have a culture in your tribe, in your work group, in your big company, whether you have identified and worked on it or not. So, big sweeping thing to say, culture is a buzzword. Most people get it wrong. I'm not mad at them for it, but culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast. Culture and strategy and people are three strands of one very, very strong cord when you get it right. And so they're all intertwined. They're all overlapping. It matters. Okay, so if that's my starting place, then how does faith come into this? If you do the math, Monday through Friday, if you're only a 40-hour-a-week person, half of your waking hours are spent with the people around you at work. And we have these old adages about, like, check your personal baggage at the door. Nobody wants to hear about that. Okay, well, now we have to not bring a single thing that's personal into the workplace. And then don't share your faith, especially if you're Christian. And if you're Christian, in my case, don't be Catholic. Like, that's like the worst of the worst, right? So I'm going to go through the better part of my adult life until I get to retirement, checking my personality, my own energy boosts and energy drains, and the things that I'm excited about and the things that I'm anxious about in my personal life at the door. And I'm going to take the number one thing in my life. I already said it to you. Faith comes before my spouse before my kids, and my kids before else. I'm going to take the number one thing in my life, and I'm going to reserve it for when I have enough energy, maybe after work or maybe just on weekends. It's so soul crushing that the chances that you're going to get the best version of me are slim. In fact, I would say they're nil, but let's just go down this path for a second. I want to create cultures. This is me. You may have a culture that you would like to do the opposite of this, and that's your prerogative. I want to create cultures where teams of people are highly aligned but loosely controlled. They are along for the same mission and vision. They adhere to and believe in the same values, but the way in which they're going about that is with a great level of autonomy and responsibility, with both freedom and accountability, all of the pieces that then help that work to be formative, to be exhilarating, for the trials and the triumphs to be places of learning. And that if I can turn work, all work is people, if I can turn work into a team sport for selling, serving, fixing, billing, collecting, doing, then all of a sudden I might have a highly engaged set of people that say I get to go to work, right? If all or most of my people say I get to go to work, not I have to, they view work differently. They view the purpose of work as being somehow formative to their human person. I bet I get the best energy, creative problem solving, appropriate risk taking. I bet we get less people checking the clock and more people checking on each other, that people have less overlap with each other and less gaps, less HR issues, less legal issues, less bad turnover, less cost for recruiters. And we end up taking both the bottom line cost down and the top line growth up because we've created something that's better than the alternative. People are being blossomed into who they were called to be, and we're getting the best version of them, even when they're making mistakes. But I can't do that if I've asked you to check your soul at the door. So you may have a totally different worldview than me. I, as a Christian, want to know what makes you tick, what drives you, what's unique about you, what's your quirks. And I don't have to say that just because I want to know those things that I agree with them, or that I think that certain things about your life or lifestyle are things I want to adapt. It can be that for the sake of humanity, or for, in my case, for my love of God and then my love of all for his sake, that I just have a curiosity about human beings. And if somebody else knows that they have a coworker or a boss or a leader that's just on this journey with them, this truth-seeking journey, can't we do something really special if we put all those people together in the same business? So faith is critical in as much as it matters to the human person. If it doesn't matter to that human person, I'm not going to force them into anything in a work environment, but maybe I'm a good model for them by the way I live my faith.
Okay. I love this, and I think you've said a lot of the benefits of having a good, healthy, positive culture, and I think a lot of the listeners would agree with you on those benefits. I think, but my question is, how are these benefits derived differently with your approach, or how? I mean, I would think or would venture to say that there's other approaches that would claim to have similar results, though they are not faith-based. Like a lot of
But mine
them
isn't,
could.
yeah. Gosh, sorry. This is
It-
such an interesting point. My approach isn't faith-based. It's my faith that informed it, but it has nothing. I lead people
Yeah.
from Mexico City to New York City and everywhere in between, far left, far right, extremists, you name it. I've been in leadership positions with all of them. The things, the core pieces of who I am as a leader are informed by the teachings of Jesus Christ and the gospel, well, the way they're expressed in the teachings of the social teachings of the church. But none of them ever have to be faith-based for the person receiving them. It's what is causing me to do them, not what's causing them to receive them. So the common good. I believe that our businesses should exist to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. That could be that it's a CPA firm, a manufacturer, whatever. But in that, the common good is not pornography. The common good is not genocide, whatever you want to say. So there's a common good piece. I believe in subsidiarity, which is giving people tremendous responsibility down to the lowest possible level so the decisions are made where they're impacted by people the most and not centralized with a us versus them mentality. Guess what? The rest of the world agrees with me. They write books called Extreme Ownership, and they talk about empowerment and they talk about agency. I'm just using a very spiritual word just now that I wouldn't use with a secular client. But the human person is driven by feeling connected to a challenge, overcoming it, and having responsibility in that, and being dignified in the way they're treated. None of that has anything to do with Christ or not Christ. It's me and my love of Christ that causes me to stick with that, even when it would be much easier to just take over or to tell people they're wrong or to just be the kind of jerk smart boss in the room. So that's subsidiarity. Then you think about solidarity. We're going to be in solidarity with those that are less fortunate. That's how I spend my time, money, and energy outside of work. We're also going to be in solidarity with people that are going through tough times. That's the empathy. That's the ability to come alongside people and throw out the corporate handbook or the rule book when it comes to supporting our people, that I'll give you 7 or 8 months off when you lose a child, and I'll let you come work because you feel like it, not because you have to, and we'll take care of that. And I have great examples of this and what it does to a culture when you go through that kind of muck and tragedy together. And then keep going. The dignity of all human people. To me, that is a statement that crosses into conception of to death. But in the workplace, that's how do I talk about people in closed doors? It's what are the ways in which people are talked about after they have been fired or they quit. It's the dignity of the work itself. As you think about dignity, we can put that infused in everything we do, or we can both intentionally and unintentionally strip it away. And most times it's unintentional. Justice, just wages. Just because I could get away with paying somebody less because they're desperate doesn't mean I should. I should actually be giving just wages for the cause of I care about the human person that has been put under my care in that job role. So my way and the way of somebody who doesn't believe in any higher power are not different. Mine is just so deeply rooted that I don't have to question whether or not it's coming from a source or a power or a place that is good and pure and true when I go and enact these policies. Now, I'm sorry I cut you off. I am so mad about what you were asking. You got one there. Don't flush it. I was supposed to say that after every big, like, don't flush it. Don't flush it.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about starting a segment. It's like flush or do not flush, and I think this one is definitely a do not flush. So yeah, I'll be sure to add that in post. The one of the things I wanted to ask, so basically based on what you just said, my understanding is that you have your faith, you have your understanding of the lessons and the teachings, and based on those, you said, those there's a lot of wisdom in Christ's teachings, and I'm going to use it, could translate them into the context of the professional corporate world. And then based on that, so when you go in, it's not like you're going in and you're preaching, you're actually using, correct me if I'm wrong, you're using normal, let's call it business jargon or terminology, but what you're saying is that all of this is based on your understanding of Christianity.
Yeah, I'll give you the reverse of this. I agree with what you're saying. Now I'm going to flip it on its head. I've never seen a sound business teaching that actually isn't rooted in the truth of what we've been taught for 2,000 years. And so I'm gonna just keep pulling out books. This is so funny. I knew this one was sitting here. This one's called Tribal Leadership. Neither one of these books have a faith aspect whatsoever. Netflix is not a Christian company, newsflash. Tribal Leadership talks about the stages of a tribe and the words and relationships that you can shift to take somebody from mid-level 3 to high-level 3, from high-level 3 to low-level 4, and then what happens in the outputs when a tribe can go through that, up into including level 5 being transcendent, that I'm no longer even competing with other firms. I'm competing with what's possible. So it's like a high water mark that you get to set. I have done day-long seminars where I dissect how great this practical playbook is for just building out, for coaching and high grading a culture, but using it interlaid with teachings from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, using it in teachings of some of the popes that have come along and talked about work and capital and the human person. And so, yes, I think Jocko Willing and these people that do extreme ownership are so spot on. They didn't come up with the concept, is my point, and neither did I. That's existed since long before in teaching a man how to fish. And so, yes, what you're saying is right. I just derive myself at the same endpoint through a different entry point than what you said.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm practicing.
So do you feel like this has this ever alienated, that when you go and approach clients, do you clearly convey that this is how I come up with my practice or your methodology, or do you say this is how I came up with it, and here's I'm going to cite some scientific journals or articles or sources that can back up what I'm saying. I'm just trying to make sure that I can come bring in different perspectives here to the conversations, just so I can, see if I can represent all the audience,
For sure.
and just curious if any of them come and say, this is not something I want in my organization.
Yeah. So great question. I would say that the number one thing that people reach out to us for is they've either been following the stuff that we've done for the last 2 years. We're only a 2-year-old company, or they have a long history of having witnessed the successes of the things that I've either launched or done turnarounds on. And so in that, those people generally will know who I am and what I stand for. But the turnarounds and the startups have zero faith component to them whatsoever, but they're based on these principles. I started a nonprofit from scratch. I won the Points of Light Award less than 2 years later. And now it's a 25-year-old organization that has impacted hundreds of thousands of lives. I did a turnaround of an electricity company that had decades long history that had to be reformatted. By the time we left, most of the employees said, I get to come to work. They had a common good view of the world, that they viewed that their job wasn't to make money, it was to help people. And that in the culture that we built out and the technology we put in place and the growth that we had, all of which was a culture play. Instead of selling that business for $200 million, we sold it for $300 million for those exact reasons. And it was tied to the pieces of that business that I was running. I'm not taking the credit for it. I'm telling you that the scoreboard says people listen whenever I have to talk about what a culture as a strategy looks like. And then even in the latest 14 years ago, I did a startup energy consulting firm, and 13 years ago, and I guess 14, geez, time flies. And it is now in the top 5 largest out of several thousand competitors. The valuation of it is significant. The people that it attracts, some people haven't moved their job in 15, 20, 25 years, and they go work for that firm because there's something fundamentally different about the quality of the advice, the quality of the culture, the quality of the momentum that they've never experienced before. And so in each of those, CARPOOL, First Choice Power, and 5, none of it has a faith component. It has a scoreboard component, and it is consistently being done over and over. And I'm doing it with clients right now. I'm doing it with our own companies right now. And it's because it's a playbook that I didn't have to write in order to enact the deploying it. I'm just a great practitioner of it, right? I've had enough at bats. I can see the big picture. I know where to drill in and take care of things. So the first part of my answer is no, people don't get turned off because they're coming to us when they already have proof in the pudding. We have a huge call with a hospital system tomorrow that they are a public hospital system, but because the decision makers there have worked in some of my nonprofits before, they know what we're talking about here. Now, on the flip side, yeah, I've definitely been told that I'm not a good fit. I was brought in on multiple occasions to be a keynote speaker, to run workshops, or even to be a consultant. And it's very clear at the moment that some corporate, HR team or diligence team goes in and they read about me and they just look at my LinkedIn. They follow or go and read that I was on the Do Not Flash podcast. And then I become a risk to them, because why would you ever let a Christian and even a Catholic into our organization when we're supposed to be inclusive? And that is one of the biggest misses of all time, because go back to the proof in the pudding. I've been an inclusive leader who is genuinely interested in the people around me, every single stakeholder. And that is a myopic view that people put band-aids over things in their organizations and are trying to keep their jobs. But there's nothing growth-oriented or culture-oriented about people that are afraid of speakers or consultants just because I happen to have an actual belief in something.
I mean, there's no question, like everything you talked about, and especially was impressed by how, how the culture you build will even dictate or encourage or help build a culture where even if somebody separates from an organization, there's a certain decorum, a certain way of holding, conducting yourself and talking about that person after they leave. To me, that's just gold. That's definitely something that I won't say I've never heard of before, but it's definitely something that it's with having 15 years in corporate America, I can tell you that's not something that's the norm. Usually, once or twice you're going to hear something that might not be, let's say, the best thing to hear. And then the other thing was in regards to how they're compensated. As I think right now, also with the white collar job market in today's world, it's been very tough for a lot of job seekers, from what I understand. And when they do find you find these high caliber individuals, and they come in and they're well qualified for the job, but they're coming in and they're getting, if they get an offer, it's like 50-60% of what they're used to getting, because they're like, well, that's the market right now, so we're going to take advantage of it, which kind of ties back to what you're saying. Why would you want to hire someone where you might feel like you just saved like, let's say 50, 60, $100,000 a year, but in reality, it's what kind of output do you think this person is going to give when they know you can afford to give them what they truly deserve, and when they also, it appeals to your humanity. There's nothing about what you said in terms of the output of your methods that I would say anyone would find, that I would venture to say anyone would find negative, unless they're a greedy, a person that just doesn't care and doesn't care about turnover and just wants to save every penny. Then that's a different story. They'll disagree with what you and I are saying in terms of the output, of what you are doing.
Well, I know a lot of people who know the output, so they don't even, in a good way, I mean this, they don't care why I have the input. So in other words, it's like, Jeff, go do this. And then I get to go build cultures with the great, stunning people around me that create these outputs. And I'm doing it from a place of a love for humanity, a love for human innovation and human formation, and my love of Christ. And even the other person will know that's why I'm doing it. And they'll say, I don't care why you're doing it. I would rather have a healthy organization, so go for it. So that's rare, but it is people that black and white just recognize that it's not for them, but they still want it.
That was fair point, and it's good to hear. Though, two questions I have for you. One is, you mentioned some of your previous organizations and how they've, after presumably you've left, they've continued to succeed and to get to the numbers you cited. It's been, I would say, years since you've left. What part of your method helps build a culture that will last once you leave that organization? Because I feel like, ideas is one thing, implementation is another, but continuous implementation, I think that's probably one of the trickiest things to master. So I'm curious about that. And the second thing is, what would you tell someone that, let's say I'm an employee, I work at a public company, and I find out the leadership has just hired you, and I come from a different, different faith. Just curious as to what you'd say.
So let me take those in order that you asked them. If I think about the longevity question, the sustainability of an organizational culture standpoint, let's just take this brokerage company called Five. It's energy brokerage and consulting. I launched it in end of 2011. I was the chief culture officer along with several co-founders, and we built an incredible foundation, a very vibrant foundation where our mission was clear. It mattered. We backed it up with everything we said and did and wrote, and what we accepted and didn't accept. Our vision was also clear, and it was noble, and it was something people wanted to be a part of. It was fundamentally different than what they were experiencing in that industry. And then our values were lined out to where we were able to talk about not just the name of the value on the wall, but what were the behaviors that typified that value, and what were the behaviors that were antithetical to it, so that in all that we did, if I said to you that open and honest communication is a value of ours, great, that sounds great. That doesn't mean that if you tell the truth that you're meeting that value. It also means that if you're holding back, you have something that you need to share or that's burning on your heart or that you think could be better and you don't share it, that's a behavior that's antithetical because it's not being open and honest. It's actually just not being mean. You could give critical feedback to the CEO of that organization because you will have some coaching that you want to be able to bring in, and now your values aligned. If you don't bring that in, Now you're misaligned. If you ever say anything to anybody else about how you're not aligned, you're now counter to the culture. So we showed everybody the behaviors and the opposite behaviors. So that's mission, vision, values. That was the first component. The second component, there was things about that organization that we consider to be sacred space, like pieces that were immovable, that we would never change, including one that people try to rename us off and on. They would say the name of the company is 5, the digit 5. That's a crazy name. People would say, I think we're missing the mark here. We should really come up with a name like 5 Energy Advisors and sound like every other energy advisor you've ever met. 14 years later, nationally known brand, serving the Empire State Building, serving Southwest Airlines, serving all these huge brands everywhere. I will tell you that none of us regret that we stuck with this 1-digit name for a company and even trademarked it. So it becomes the spot that we say, we're 5. And when people say 5 what, we say just 5. What do you mean? Well, 5 is honoring this level 5 culture mentality that we shouldn't even be competing with others in the space. We should be competing with what's possible in a partnership mindset. And people are like, what are you talking about? So now all of a sudden the whole conversation shifted to culture and not to what's the energy rate for my next contract. And you've hooked people into a conversation that is more meaningful. And we are going to help you by being the experts in energy. That works for recruiting, clients, vendors, suppliers, bankers, you name it. So that's an example of a sacred space that everybody in that organization knew was sacred and therefore was part of the nomenclature or the feel of who we were. And then the last piece of this was we not only coached within 5, we created an entire culture of coaching. So coaches became coaches to other coaches. And in that process, we were able to trickle down and then scale up this idea that there were certain concepts about how we can operate to the best of our abilities. And that wasn't on the job training. It wasn't technical training. It wasn't, the quotas. It was literally about how you show up as a human being, your performance, your effectiveness, your communication, your relationships, how you operate within the norms, within the core values, when you faced difficult situations, how you coached others. So we built this fabric in there that I stopped coaching people. I only coached coaches. I would sit there and listen to their coaching responses so that I could work through how they coached, not who the person was getting coached. So those are the 3 pieces that I will tell you that when I walked in, I've been gone for 2 years. I walked into my old company a couple weeks ago. It feels vibrant and like home court advantage. And you can sense that the new people have this connection to me and to everybody who's ever come before them. And they're doing work that might technically have nuances to it, but they're doing it with the same love and contribution and desire to help others that's been rooted in that organization since day one. So I think there's so many examples of this. There's also examples of the cult of personality. Well, that doesn't last. If it was based on my personality, we're all screwed. I also think there's examples of things that were shallow. They used culture to get ahead. And when they got ahead, then it became about money. When it became about money, the culture cratered. You see that all the time. So those are my first 2. Then you talk about like, okay, what if somebody's skeptical? Like, okay, what is this guy going to bring to the table with his Undivided Life organization and this approach? One of the reasons we put out so much content is you don't have to question anything. You could literally go on my LinkedIn. I've written a post more than once a day since August 1st of 2022, describing everything we believe and the stories and the approach and the coaching. It's not hard if you want to go and do a little bit of research or listen to me on 1 or 2 podcasts and be like, okay, I'm starting to get the picture here. But what I would tell anybody, no matter how you feel about them, ask yourself this simple question. Am I getting this information from my perception of this person or from this person? Because Michael, I could have just read an email from you and been like, oh, this guy's blah, 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 blah. But instead, what did we do? We jumped on a call. We asked each other some questions. We shared some information. We laughed about a few things. We debated a few things. And now I don't know everything about you, but I know a little bit about where you're coming from. So I feel a connection to you. Somebody's a skeptic, or this is baloney, or there's no way it's this good. Go have the conversation. Stop being judgmental. I'm going to give you a really weird parallel to this. In high school, I can remember people saying that I thought I was too good to talk to them. And I kept asking myself, when did that person ever talk to me? And that caused me to be a different person in college, which was I'm never going to say something about somebody and project what I feel about myself in this relationship onto how they feel about me. And so I engaged people. And I found out the student body president of Texas A&M is a student who's a human who has to study for tests and broke up with his girlfriend and doesn't drive a very nice car. Like he's just a dude who said yes to something and got elected. Just like the Bishop of Dallas, the CEO of a company, and the janitor is a dude. He's a dude that if you could just talk to him about his weekend and his kids, he's got a life. And it's fun to talk to him because he's an awesome guy, just like everybody else I just named. And when you get to that level, if somebody is a problem and you've never spoken to them before, shame on you.
I couldn't agree more. And
Do
I
not
can,
flush.
dude, and I can definitely agree. And as you're talking, I started recalling some situations from my work experience where I definitely can relate to some of the points you mentioned. And it actually helped me kind of come up with another question now, which is, how do you? So then we can categorize this as a 1.1 from the questions, that I know I asked 2 questions. Is that, how do you prevent in George Orwell's Animal Farm situation, where all this culture you're building is geared towards kind of most of the employees, but how does it encompass leadership? How do you help leaders reflect upon themselves to make sure that they too are following the guidelines of this culture? Because I've been in a situation where we had, set of, call them guidelines or principles or what have you, that kind of would dictate or try to spell out what the mission is like. But I felt there was a disparity between what kind of lower level of the organization were feeling or implementing versus what it felt like on the upper level.
Yeah, right on. Well, first, we're all human beings. Everybody has free will, and I have no control. And so there's just a recognition that I wasn't called to control other people. I'm called to be a light in the world and to influence others in whatever ways that God gifted me, but I'm not called to control everybody. That doesn't mean I'm not responsible for both the delivery of my communication and your receipt of it. I am responsible for both of those, but I also got to recognize how small I am in the world. The next part of that, though, when I was thinking about leaders, coaching is it. When you can create a culture of coaching, then I would sit down with you and I would be so engaged as an active listener that I'm not just getting the fundamentals back and forth with you. I'm not just getting the check boxes of you did this, we were waiting on you for this. I'm actually finding out how you think. I'm finding out what motivates you to be a performer. I'm finding out more and more about what do you show up like in times of stress, when you're unhealthy, when there's family tragedy, when there's financial burdens. What parts of you shine? Which parts of the raw version of you that is not a good leader start to pop up more and more, and that we need to be aware of them. We need to put the bumpers up. We may even need to call time out so that we don't create a problem against the leadership that we've been building up. Likewise, I might find out, Michael, when you are hitting on all cylinders, what causes you to have these healthy, amazing sprint parts of your year or projects that you get fed by and challenged by, and then you overcome and you have this mastery. And when you're in those moments, how can we leverage that you might be a great resource for somebody who needs that energy or who is struggling and could certainly use you going and doing your job plus part of theirs for this small period. And in leadership, it's no different, right? I had a leader who every fall he would run into this time where it was the anniversary of the death of his parents, and the sullen, melancholic, somewhat depressed person would show up on these Zoom calls. But even when we were doing a pitch for a client or working through an issue, you could see this weight and this heaviness. And the request was, look, if you need to be on this call, use this as your excuse to not share your video, because we're actually having trouble talking. We're so worried about how terrible you look. Or don't work. We have an unlimited vacation policy. If you know it's coming, what do you like to do? You like to go on retreat? Go on a 2-week retreat. Tell us you're going to do it every October. That's fine. But I want to, as a coach, love that person enough to know why it's happening and to help them through active listening solve their own problem. You ask enough questions, people usually 9 times out of 10 come up with answers and thank you. And all you did was ask questions.
Beautiful. And I definitely can cite one or two examples of that happening with the whole questions approach. So going back to my second question, um, what would you tell the person that comes in and says, I've did some research on you and I come from a different background. How would you address them?
I'd ask them what they found and what they thought of it. How did that impact them? What questions do they have? What concerns do they have? And in those concerns, what are ways that those concerns could be addressed? And if they knew in this very transparent manner how I felt and what I was thinking and how I usually approach things, would they be open to creating a relationship where it was based on mutual respect? Would they be okay if I asked them questions? Since my life is fairly public and not hard to discover some of these attributes, would they mind if I understood and got to learn more about them and find out more of what has caused their life to be both vibrant and difficult, just like we all have? I've done that.
Have you
Yeah, I was gonna say it works. You'd have to be a pretty hurt person to not engage in that conversation.
Can you give us an example of such a conversation? What the obviously I know I missed conversation, but like
Yeah, it usually happens once I'm around somebody for a while, because it's rare that somebody says, I learned this stuff about you and I don't want to engage. Most people kind of go along to get along. So what you end up in is people that say, I've always thought of the Catholic Church as this, and this, but I know that you seem to be very proud of your faith and strong in your faith. Can I ask you some questions about how you view the Mass or priests, or how you understand authority, or fill in the blank? And I'm like, great. I said, I can remember one time somebody said, my new girlfriend is Catholic. I've always thought Catholics were weirdos. But now I don't want to show up uninformed. Can you help me to walk through some of this, because it's so foreign to me? And I was like, yeah, let's just go where you're ready to go. It's almost like walking with a child that you're raising. You don't just jump to philosophical or theological debates. You might just talk about some very basic things like, what is it you don't like about this practice? And when people tell you like, oh, okay, well, let me tell you why that part resonates with me. I think I have a different viewpoint into it. The respect that we can have when we vote differently, right? You and I are recording this on the day of an inauguration for a president. I have friends that voted for all sorts of stuff. Great. That doesn't change how I feel about them as friends. It just means that when we get into a dialogue, we're not making any assumptions. We're going to ask each other questions and have good conversation. Somebody may share something with me and I get a chance to ponder like, I never thought about it from that perspective. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was cutting you off.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I do a ton of pro-life work. If you're around pro-life long enough, you should encounter people who help you to understand that pro-life is not anti the person who made a decision to abort a child, or pro-life for us is really way more than just abortion. It has to do with anything for the disadvantaged, the elderly, the way that people work in their working conditions. It's everything. But my point is, you can encounter people and realize that they're not out to do something wrong. They think they're doing something right, and their lens at which they're approaching it may be very different than yours. And now you can have dialogue. Dialogue's awesome. God works with dialogue.
Yeah, and honestly, it's one of the things that I'm trying to do with this show, with this podcast, is essentially try to bridge voices. There's only like one show that I think in mainstream media that kind of tries to bring both sides, but that's just one. And I want to be able to have both sides, because in my perspective on it is that kind of more of a bit anatomy of from what I understand, I'm no doctor, the anatomy of the human body is that the most people are either left brain dominant or right brain dominant. One makes you more analytical, one makes you more creative. And given that, you will see a problem, and for each problem, you'll have your own unique, different perspective on it.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that one side is right or one side is wrong. It just means they have a different perspective. And then to try to say that, all problems facing a company or a country is going to be solved with one perspective, to me, it's obviously wrong. It's going to be a balance. It has to have both sides. And I'm hoping that on a show like this, we're able to bridge those voices, because I think, like you said, communication is a beautiful thing. A lot of problems and issues can be solved by simply listening and understanding. And it's honestly one of the drivers of starting Do Not Flush. I want to be able to surface some of these ideas that most people just flush.
During COVID, after George Floyd, in the height of all the different movements, I had a virtual all hands for my company. And I'll remind you that that old company, I had employees from Mexico City to New York City, left, right, everywhere in between. And they thought a handful of people thought I was rolling the dice too much because I brought in an outside speaker over Zoom. It was the first time I could bring in my friend because he lived in DC, and I wasn't ever going to have another virtual all hands if I could avoid it. But I brought in a congressman who was a Republican, and he was also the only Black Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives, Will Hurd, representing the 23rd District in Texas. And I knew Will in college. We were both leaders there. We both had cool overlaps in our friendships and relationships and work we did together. But he sat there and he said that his advice to people is to always recognize that there's more that unites us than divides us. I know we've heard that. But then he said, you are a human being, which means you are nuanced. So he said, you can be mad about the treatment of a Black man in this situation, and mad about defunding the police, and he started just going down this litany of all the different pieces. He said, be nuanced, be a human being, and then engage. And I thought it was so beautiful, because then I look on the screen, 60 people across the Zoom, and I'm scrolling and trying to make sure I could see where everybody was at emotionally. I had people crying on both sides of the aisle because they're actually just human beings trying to do their best along the way.
And that's beautiful. I wish I was able to, or you had it recorded. I would love to watch it. But Jeff, I know we're almost out of time. This was a very insightful conversation, and I'm very thankful and humbled that you agreed to jump on a new podcast that no one has heard of. And you were able to give us some insights into a very interesting topic. I love how you were able to cite faith, but also be connected to some well-published or well-respected books as well. So, you have the scientific backing, which I think is pretty cool from what I just saw in based on the accolades and whatnot. I hope this is one of many conversations, and unless you have any other final remarks, we can conclude for the day.
I think you're onto something, so do not flush this podcast. That's my final remarks.
I love it. Thank you, Jeff. Have a great day, and see you soon.
May God bless us all. See you, Michael.
Take care. Bye-bye.